Hi guys! I hope you guys are doing well. I have had quite a lot of questions about what I mean by peat heavy potting soil. And just talking about peat moss and how in general it can be problematic for some succulents, etc. And so I had to buy a bag of just regular potting soil because I have a few plants that need to be repotted that are not succulents, and I had nothing but really, really loose succulent type soil and perlite and vermiculite and pumice and all of my additives, but no soil to add them to. And so I grabbed this bag of potting soil, and I wanted to show you on the back of the bag, on the back of pretty much any potting soil, because I've been asked quite a few times how to tell if your potting soil has a lot of peat moss in it or if it's coconut husk, etc. And so if you look on the back, in general, if you go down to where all the words start getting small, you will almost always find an ingredient label like this on the back of your potting soil bag. And as you can see for this one, this product is formulated from sphagnum peat moss, perlite, fertilizer, and a wetting agent. And then below they give you the fertilizer ingredients. Most of these guys, if you're wondering what the wetting agent is, it comes from agave, and it just doesn't dry out as fast as water does, and so it makes the soil nice and pretty when you look at it and keeps it from drying completely out usually. And so that's why they use that instead, and that's generally what the wetting agent is. But some bags will say sphagnum peat moss, some will just say peat moss. It is the exact same thing. Sphagnum moss is an entirely different moss. We don't use it for potting soil. It can contain a lot of fungus and spores and different things. It's usually used decoratively, but it's typically not in potting soils. Actually, I don't know if it's ever used in potting soils, but I hate to use completely blanket statements. But that I know of, they rarely use sphagnum moss in potting soils. But sphagnum peat moss, which is its full name, other people will just call it peat moss, is just decayed plant material of all types that gets compacted over thousands of years into bogs, and then they harvest it. And peat moss is quite acidic, which I have talked about in other videos, and some plants love the acid, and a lot of the house plants that we typically grow or that are popular, you know, in stores and stuff, like more acidic soil. And so peat moss is a great thing. It's also cheap, it's also easy to harvest, etc., etc. And I won't get into all of the environmental effects of robbing peat bogs, which are interesting to look into, but it's just one of the most commonly used ingredients in potting soil. If you can find a potting soil that has more compost, etc. in it, yay, that's awesome. But generally this is what you're going to find. And checking the back, especially if you're using it for succulents, can be really good. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't use this for succulents. It just means that you probably need to add some more amendments to it before you use it. A lot of the succulents that you buy in stores are just planted directly into this type of a potting mix. Even most mixes that are labeled for succulent use are going to be primarily peat. Now, a lot of succulents don't mind peat as far as an actual growing medium. Even like lithops, they actually like the acidity a lot, and so peat could be a medium that would be okay, but there's, as far as the actual nutrient content and the acidity, but there's other problems that we incur with peat, and one of the main ones is it gets hydrophobic really, really easily, which means it repels water. And so if you're not bottom watering and putting a pot into a dish of water and allowing it to soak up from the bottom over a period of an hour or so, it can really have detrimental effects on your root system, because when which I don't have a pot here to describe, so you'll just have to imagine, but when we have a pot, the soil on top forms a really hard crust when it's primarily peat based a lot of times, and then the water that you water at the base of the plant will be repelled off of the top and run down the sides of the pot and down the bottom and out the holes. And so a lot of Gardeners, advice givers, YouTubers, etc. will suggest watering a plant until the water comes out of the holes, and then you know the plant is good and saturated. However, if your soil has become hydrophobic, that is really not a good way to tell, because the water can run right down the sides, right out the bottom, and not actually soak the soil or give the roots a really good drink. And so that's just something to watch out for. And how we kind of get around that is either by using something different or adding amendments. And amendments like perlite, which would need to be a lot more. We saw this has perlite in it, but you can see the amount, which is just the little white specks. And since that's the only other ingredient other than peat, this tells you this is almost entirely peat. And for some plants, you know, for carnivorous plants, etc., they love peat. They really do. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But for succulents, when we don't water them very often and then we give them a good soak, it's really important for them to get a soak and their roots to really have a nice little bath. And so if it's running off the top and over the sides, etc., that's problematic, especially if we don't notice it. But mixing with pumice, you know, it takes quite a lot, and so like I would mix a half and half ratio a lot of times of pumice to, you know, a potting soil type mix to get the consistency that I want. But using other ingredients like pumice, like perlite, like vermiculite, sand, even for some epiphytes, etc., some bark can be fine. It will help break up the soil isn't the word that I'm looking for, but it allows it not, it doesn't allow it to form a hard crust, because there's so many other things in it that are making it lighter and more porous. That's the word I'm looking for, more porous. And so using especially like pumice really helps to help the water drain all the way through, and it helps aerate your root system. The other thing about peat is it compacts. Obviously, it's naturally found in bogs, and they harvest it in these huge bricks because it's very, very compacted. And so as you water and as the soil settles just over time, which all potting medium will do, peat settles a lot more than some of the others. And so this can prevent air circulation from the roots, trap fungus and stuff underneath to where it's not so exposed to the air, and it kind of can form little pockets where things can kind of grow and cause problems later. And when we add amendments that will help make it more porous and have a lot more air circulation, that can really remedy the problem quite well. So yeah, if you are wondering what's in your potting soil, check out and see if there's an ingredient label on it. If not, look up the brand, and a lot of times online you can find out what's in it exactly, which is always a helpful thing to know. And then it also gives you a good idea of what you might need to add to it. And if you're trapped, you know, in Miracle-Gro potting mixes, all you can get, don't panic, you know, just get some amendments. You can order most amendments other than pumice on Amazon if you're in a rural area like me and it's harder to find them. But vermiculite, perlite, sand, etc. are great additives if you can't find pumice. Pumice is, of course, my favorite. And you can order it a lot of places as well. And I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again here. If you are having trouble finding pumice at your local nurseries, first off, finding it at places like Walmart or Home Depot is not going to happen. I have never found it anywhere like that. So usually you would need to go to a local nursery or something like that. But if you don't find it there, try checking out feed stores. A lot of times it's sold to put on the bottom of horse stalls to help keep their feet dry, and it's called Dry Stall is one brand. It can be other brands. Just make sure there's no additives or chemicals. Sometimes they put a chemical to help prevent fungal infections, etc. on horse hooves in it. So just double check to make sure it's pure pumice. But if it's pure pumice, that's fantastic, and that's exactly what you want. And you can buy a really big bag for a lot less expensive a lot of times than nurseries sometimes, and other times nurseries will be comparable. but definitely cheaper than ordering it. And ordering, usually the shipping is what kills you. Obviously, it's not usually horrendously expensive depending on where you buy it, but the shipping can get expensive. So check out feed stores and see if you can find pumice there if you're having trouble finding it and you would like to try it out, because it is definitely one of the most amazing things. It has so many minerals in it. It's like a magnet for nutrients. You can even take pumice and soak it in compost tea or various organic fertilizer type compounds, and it will supercharge the pumice. You can then drain the liquid off, dry out your pumice, and then use it as you usually would, but it retains those nutrients out of compost tea is a great example. They use this commercially. They do this. They take pumice and soak it in different things and spread it over lawns to help them be green or whatever, because the pumice slowly releases the nutrients. It's like a nature's time release for nutrients, which is amazing. And that's one of the reasons that I love it. There are many other reasons I love it. I won't keep yapping about that here. But yeah, I just wanted to make a comment here that peat, while I tend to avoid it in a lot of areas, isn't bad. And even, lithops can do very well in peat. They love the acidity, and it's just that the hydrophobic and all a few different things, and the fact that it's organic, etc., can cause them some problems. So it's generally discouraged, at least in a pure potting mix form like this. But mixed in small amounts with other things, it can really help with the acidity for the succulents that like higher acidity. Some of them really don't like it, and for those, things like pumice, etc., is a better choice for the plants that aren't as fond of acidic environments. But yeah, I will close for there. I could just keep going on and on about situations where you might want to use peat or might not. But in some of my other videos, I've kind of been anti-peat, and I get focused when I'm planting something, and especially when I'm talking about a specific plant. And sometimes people think then that's applying to all succulents, and it's not. A lot of times it's very specific to the variety. I have said many times, and will say again, that succulent advice as a general category is about as helpful as tree advice when you're wanting your apple tree to make apples. If you got online and were trying to figure out how to get your apple tree to bear fruit, and people were just like, well, trees generally like this, it's not helpful. There is such a huge variety of trees that need different environments, completely different soil requirements. Just everything can be so different, and it's the same with succulents. The category of succulent is a huge category and ranges all the way from extreme desert conditions to snowy mountains in the Alps. And so to think that all succulents could be lumped into one category is kind of ludicrous. But that being said, there are some general guidelines that we can give, and having a more porous soil for succulents is always advised, or at least not going to be harmful. It's not always necessary, but it is generally advised for the healthiest plants possible to have at least a fairly loose mix that can get really good air circulation. So I will leave it there. If you're wondering about your plant and exactly how much amendments you need to do for a specific variety, try looking up that specific variety and seeing, looking up the variety in conjunction with pH. So type in Google the name of your plant and then say pH needs or something like that on the end, and see if you can find some good information on just the type of pH that they generally like. And that can help you understand what type of potting medium they would best like, and if you can get away with using some peat, or even it would be advantageous to use a little bit of peat, or if it is really not something that you would want to incorporate for that plant's ideal health. Yeah, I hope that helps you guys. I know sometimes me giving a lot of information can make things a little bit more confusing, especially talking about how different varieties need different things, and it can be a little bit overwhelming at times. But There are general guidelines, of course, that you can implement in the meantime, and then just slowly, as you are able, find out a little bit more about your particular species and what they like, and go from there. No need for panic or overwhelm at, oh no, now I have to figure out what every single plant needs. It takes time, and and there's enough general guidelines that can help you hopefully keep them healthy in the meantime. And with that, I will let you all go. I hope you're having a fantastic day. Happy 2018 to all of you, and happy growing.